So I guess I'll begin by talking about Martin Luther King and his overall philosophy, which could be integrationism in itself. Because integrationism is the idea of sort of accommodating or appealing to the consciousness of the oppressive people, like white America in this case. And it's a resistance philosophy in itself because it seeks to make space for humanity where humanity is not wanted. And so it tries to show that we are meritorious enough to be included in your society, in your way of life. And so there is very much an appeal to the conscience of those in power and a struggle to exemplify that meritorious experience that the people in power are looking for. So that's one way to talk about Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy. So I've provided some definitions by the scholar James Cone, which goes like this. Integrationism is this phenomenon among Black oppressed, and this idea of integrationism was historically created by chattel enslavement and segregation. So there's a famous philosopher named W.E.B. Du Bois who discussed this concept when he talked of this phenomenon as a peculiar sensation, a double consciousness, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder, end quote. The two-ness that Du Bois was describing stem from being an African in America. Here, then, is the dilemma. He wrote in The Conversation of Races, what am I, after all? Am I an American or am I a Negro? Can I be both? And then that's the end of his quote and the end of James Cone's quote. And this question points to the dilemma of integrationism. That quote came from James Cone on page 3. So Cone says of, who's a philosopher and theologian, by the way, says of integrationism, integrationist thinkers may be defined as those who answer yes to the question. They believe the question of, like, can I be both, right? They believe it is possible to achieve justice in the United States and to create wholesome relations with the white community. This optimism has been based upon the American creed, the tradition of freedom and democracy as articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and is supported, they believe, by the Jewish and Christian scriptures. The integrationist line of thought goes something like this. If whites really believe their political and religious documents, then they know that black people should not be enslaved and segregated, but rather integrated into the mainstream of society. After all, blacks are Americans, having arrived even before the Pilgrims. They have worked the land, obeyed the laws, paid their taxes, and defended America in every war. They built the nation as much as white people did. Therefore, the integrationists argue it is the task of the African American leaders to prick the conscience of whites, showing the contradiction between their professed values and their actual treatment of blacks. Then whites will be embarrassed by their hypocrisy and will grant blacks the same freedom that they themselves enjoy. This is Cone on page 3 and 4 of Martin and Malcolm in America. So then we get this contrast of black nationalism. So black nationalism is a competing philosophy, although this will sort of come from the Malcolm X philosophy and roots there that you'll soon read about. On the other hand, nationalist thinkers have rejected the American side of their identity and affirmed with the African side, saying, quote, "No, we can't be both," unquote. They have contended that 244 years of slavery, followed by legal segregation, social degradation, political disfranchisement, and economic exploitation means that blacks will never be recognized as human beings in a white society. America isn't for blacks. Blacks can't be for America. The black nationalists, argue that blacks don't belong with whites, that whites are killing blacks generation after generation. So, therefore, blacks should separate from America, either by returning to Africa or going to some other place where they can create socio-political structures that are derived from their own history and culture. So that comes from Cone on page 4. So initially, what we've done here is we've exposed the W.E.B. Du Bois question, where he basically talks about the double consciousness. And sort of the split within the psyche, within the identity of a person of color living in America after the effects of chattel enslavement, after the effects of segregation, and everything else that follows. And so there's the question: can I be black and can I be American?